border now. The two women who were killed and found dismembered in Juarez on Sunday were from El Paso.
On the southern border, there is a legal concept known as reasonable fear, a lifeline for those fleeing violence.
A Texas couple was found tortured and murdered.
Police say so far this month, 11 women have been killed in Juarez.
And then their bodies or body parts offered up to Santa Muerte as an offering. She represents death.
In this special Borderland docuseries, I take a deep dive onto true crime stories. Join me as we uncover the truth about the fear behind the crisis.
This was a group of powerful people.
Never been seen before in Mexico.
Evidence of ritualistic elements.
We ended up rescuing almost 200 kids.
The discovery of multiple women in mass graves.
They're almost in every state.
When you put it together, you have an economic extortion map.
But even more violent. Biggest gain, least amount of time, 2-on-1. So wherever the threat comes from, attack that with 2 of your limbs, with everything you have, all of your body weight, and try to be violent about getting out of that choke until you can either apply pressure, counter strike, break contact, flank, and get to a better position.
The information in this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes. Our informational content cannot address all dangerous situations and cannot guarantee your survival or prevent injuries when the unexpected happens. The decision to carry a firearm, either for recreation or for personal defense, carries the risk and potential for injury and/or death. Therefore, it is advised that you seek out and acquire proper training before using a firearm or any firearm-related product.
What are some self-defense techniques?
What would happen if there was a global internet outage?
What should I do if I hear shots ringing out?
Or what I should do if there's a major terrorist attack?
What should I have? What's the best?
What should I do?
What does that look like?
What would you recommend? Is there anything I could do?
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Dangerous Questions. We're going to be covering escape, evasion, SERE type questions. There've been a lot of questions about that. And, you know, especially when it relates to the border, and those principles do apply to our lives. You know, the stuff that I learned, and I've been into multiple SERE schools, multiple escape and evade, interrogation, all that stuff. I mean, honestly, it was a blessing to be able to go through all that because it does translate to a lot of what we go through in life, but it also helped us out, you know, in real world scenarios on target again and again and again. So I'll go through some of those scenarios with you guys, lessons learned, and things that hopefully you can take away and apply to your life. Dangerous Questions. This is an IRONCLAD original. Let's get right into it. First question, I believe, is a video.
How do you get away from someone pointing a gun at you? Also, what is the best way to get out of a chokehold?
Appreciate your question. It's kind of a two-part question. Escape and evasion, you know, this is combatives related, but still, you know, that interaction that we're having on a daily basis and also those threats that we face. So let me break this down in two parts. First is, how do you get away from somebody pointing a gun at you? Well, always, guys, always, I'm never gonna not mention it, but context. What is the context? The principle that I talk about, I'm pretty sure just about every episode, is environmental manipulation. We have to understand what's going on around us. How close is that threat? How close is somebody holding that gun to our face? So the question was, how do you get away from them? Well, I remember training with Boss Rutan and guys with different combatives takeaways and weapon takeaways. But one of the things that was brought up was, hey, if a guy walks in the door, he kicks the door and there's three dudes there and he goes bang, bang, shoots two of them and you're the one left, and now you're the witness. So he's coming after you next, right? And I'm saying this kind of in a vacuum, but chances are he's going to come after you. So you have to make a decision. You have to do something about it. Can I break contact from that guy, or am I gonna close the gap with that guy? And honestly, if it's in that distance where it's like, oh, this is a room and there's no way out but through you, then I'm gonna come after you with everything I can. I'm gonna try to figure out, you know, maybe I move as fast as I can violently, or I sprint over that way, or I hit the wall running and come at him as fast and violently as I possibly can. Or I think about it from an environmental situation where if I'm in an alleyway and I got vehicles around me, what can I use to my advantage in my environment that puts an obstacle between me and the potential threat? You know, and I'm thinking about that stuff in split seconds, guys. And what's important for you guys is to visualize this stuff. I say it all the time, but walk through a scenario. What is a scenario that you're gonna have a guy pointing a gun at you where you have to get away and break contact? Can I just fade away behind the car and the next thing I know, now I'm in the door of the restaurant and I'm weaving through to break contact? Am I, in a subway station where I can get off the train and sprint towards the stairs or put a pillar between me and the person? Am I in a 7-Eleven where I can get behind bottles of Coke stacked up, and now I'm breaking contact in the aisles until I'm out the back door or the front door? You have to be able to rep that out in your mind and visualize that again and again to think about how you're breaking contact. If somebody's pointing a gun at you, what is the context? Can I use my environment? Can I use cover and concealment to my advantage? Can I get away or attack violently? Again, if I'm in that situation where that's it, it's me left and they're gonna come at me next, what am I gonna do? That's where training, action, and repetition is gonna come into play. And just like the next part of this question is, how do you get out of chokehold? Well, that's a very, very, very loaded question. How did you end up there? How did you get to a point where you were getting wrapped up in the first place? And what kind of chokehold is it? The Gracies have great stuff on YouTube that you can literally go look up right now and say, Gracie, how to get out of a chokehold. You will find so many different techniques to be able to apply to that. If this video cuts off right now and I have to give you the best case scenario, and you don't have any training and you've never done jujitsu and you've never done any type of manipulation with limbs, what I would tell you is a principle that I think will help you, and if you apply it violently, is 2-on-1. It's a principle that we talk about all the time in combatives, and that's getting two of your hands on whatever limb is being applied to the choke or you're being attacked with. I want to put two hands immediately on that limb and get control to give me a second to be able to explode through that movement and then violently create space to break contact. I would say biggest gain, least amount of time, 2-on-1. So wherever the threat comes from, attack that with two of your limbs, with everything you have, all of your body weight, and try to be violent about getting out of that choke until you can either apply pressure, counter strike, break contact, flank, and get to a better position. That's what I would tell you. So it's a loaded question, and I'm trying to give you the best case scenario. And now go do your homework. Go get in the gym, sign up for a BJJ class, ask these questions on the mat, get repetitions in. I mean, people spend their whole lives dedicated to, what do I do for a rear naked? What do I do for a front choke, side choke? Whatever the choke may be, I want to apply a different methodology for getting out of that. There's different techniques that we can do. But through that repetition, like you see the Gracies apply this stuff, there's a lot that does apply to each choke. There are principles that they apply that I think are necessary for you guys to take away as well. So 2-part question, and I think I addressed those pretty well on both sides about breaking contact and then applying 2-on-1. Those are really the major two principles for those specific threats. All right, guys, this segment of Dangerous Questions is also brought to you by Mountain Tough. Mountain Tough Plus is the fitness app that's trusted by the dedicated. Who's the dedicated? You guys watching this show. We care about our ability to become assets and to be able to handle these situations, these scenarios. We're asking these questions for a reason. This is a fitness app that gives you no excuses and sets a level of fitness mindset that you guys can take with you everywhere. Mountain Tough is an all-access subscription platform. It gives you access to everything that they have available. World-class home fitness programs, mental training, self-improvement, prehab, rehab, everything that you guys need to set a solid foundation of fitness for your life. Again, fitness is really important to me, and I highly recommend this fitness app. And here on Dangerous Questions, we talk about it all the time. You've got to be prepared. Mountain Tough is giving an exclusive discount for all Dangerous Question listeners. Use the code DANGEROUS at mountaintough.com on the monthly subscription. You'll get your first month free, and that's on top of the 14-day free trial, giving you guys 6 weeks to test this out. 6 weeks of free training at mountaintough.com. Go check it out. Okay. Question 2, I believe, is a written question. What is the best way to respond to an interrogation? Are there methods to resisting physical pain or torture? I would also like to learn more about dealing with capture/interrogation and mental fatigue and stress. Okay, there's a lot going on with this question as well. You know, how to respond to an interrogation is depending on the context, right? We have everything from being pulled over and being asked, you know, why were you going so fast, right? Your adrenaline's pumping, your heart's racing, you're like, what did I do wrong? Why am I getting pulled over? And then you were speeding through, you know, a school zone or whatever the case was. That's a level of interrogation. Even being asked why you did something wrong at work, that's an interrogation. You know, you're being confronted. So repetition is important. You know, this is why going through specific training does help. Going through those reps does help. You know, when you get ready to go to an interview, that's a level of interrogation. You know, why do you want to be here? What's your purpose? You know, why did you choose this job? Why do you care about this? Why should we consider you for this job? What makes you different than everybody else? Those are all a level of interrogation that you need to be prepared for. And I hope, just like any other interrogation you're going to go through, you prepare for them by actually getting asked the question in different environments, so it prepares you mentally to respond with a level of intelligence, a level of confidence, and a level of surety that you're going to be the right person for the job. Or, you know, if we're talking about interrogation here that leads to torture, right? Pick any scenario, you know, in wartime where people have been tortured to death. You know, it's the dynamic and the spectrum of, you know, is this just a simple interrogation or does my life depend on it? You know, I think that that's really what you need to confront first. And also, the best way to prepare for these things is to train for them and to prepare for them, to visualize them happening and actually get somebody to do it. If you get somebody that's threatening you, you know, with physical harm, and that's real, this is why training is so important, you know, it does change the dynamic a little bit. You're like, wait a minute, something's actually at stake here. I actually have to consider, you know, what the consequences are this if I don't answer this appropriately. You know, and again, what sparks in my heart is a lot of what's happened in wartime is that typically somebody's planning on killing you anyway. And they're looking for the answer out of you. So no matter how you answer, you're going to get hurt or tortured. And people will go through these painful scenarios. And I'll talk a little bit about how I think we should deal with that ultimately, which is one of the questions. But you have to prepare for these things mentally. Obviously, me, I always visualize being captured and knowing with all of my heart that no matter what happens, even till death, that I was going to do everything I could to stay out of either giving up information. But before that was never letting myself get in the situation to begin with. You know, my son and I talked at length about this the other day, about these situations and scenarios. He's like, hey, you know, my future wife, you know, what do I do to keep her from getting attacked? Or what about this situation? And really the end of all of it was, how do we avoid these to begin with? How do we avoid getting captured? How do we avoid going through a situation like we talked about earlier, getting in a chokehold or confronting a guy with a gun, is to avoid putting ourselves in these environments right from the beginning. That avoids 75, 80% of the situations we could ever find ourselves into. But what happens if we actually don't have a choice and we end up in these environments like being interrogated and our life depends on it? I think that's the deeper question about this, is that, you know, are there methods to resisting physical pain and torture? Well, yes, of course there are, because ultimately, if I have to go through this anyway, if I'm going to get tortured in the most excruciating way possible, you know, think about the medieval times, think about even current times where people have been tortured to death. You know, there's information, there's something that they want. And usually that's the method they're choosing because it's you standing in the way of whether they get it or not. And what we hold on to and what we bring to fruition and what we believe is going to allow us to have the strength to be able to get through that, to be able to not give that up. You know, so your why has to be pretty strong. You know, I'm sure there's been plenty of people that have been weak of heart and weak of mind that have just given up information. And it can be where not only your life is staked on it, but also a lot of people's lives are staked on it. You know, people are constantly consuming, you know, technology and movies. I'm sure there's all these scenarios you've seen on TV where you're thinking about, well, what would I do in that scenario? And I think that to build up the resiliency of this is really important. So the methods that I would say that you can work on to be able to avoid ever giving up information that would potentially put others in danger would be to work on your why. You know, this is why I love the stories of the saints so much in the past. You know, my heart is set on Christ. My heart is set on, you know, going to the cross no matter what, if that would be the case. You know, and you think about the suffering of what Christ went through and the torturing that he went through. in order to give up that for our sake. And ultimately, the lives of the saints show that again and again and again. You know, they died for that cause. They died for that purpose and that why. Saint Florian is one that comes to mind. You know, he was somebody that was a Roman soldier. He converted to Christianity, and then ultimately they found out and said, you know, renounce your Christianity or else we're gonna, you know, toss you in the fire and burn you alive. And he ultimately said, well, cool, I'll just ride the flames to heaven. And ultimately that's the type of attitude, that's the type of fearless, bold, savage attitude that a lot of these saints had, a lot of people that have that really hold on to that why. Of course, ultimately he found humor in that, and they ended up, you know, drowning him and finding a different way. But the heart was the same, the intent was the same. It was still the thought process of saying that no matter what, I have hope and trust, and that the outcome of this is going to be for my benefit. So ultimately, to wrap that idea up, is to go through anything difficult like this, of thinking about being tortured and increasing our resiliency to what would I do in that scenario, is have a unwavering grasp on your why, your purpose. Why do I exist? Why am I here? And to be able to get through that, you know. And can I use an example in my life? Of course. If somebody asked me where my kids were and I knew that their lives were at risk, and they said, you know, we're going to torture you to death unless you tell us. I mean, that's a very simple physical understanding of, like, you're just never going to get that information. The evil intent is not going to get its way through me to find out where my kids are to cause them harm. I am going to lay my life down to protect them. And that's an important distinguishing example to make, because we're not just sitting here saying, okay, I'm going to lie to somebody. No, lives are at stake. Innocent lives are at risk, and I'm going to stand in the breach to be able to defend against that. So think about what your why is, and why you would go to the cross, and why you would go to your death to defend that truth, to defend the truth of protecting the innocent life that's at stake, and knowing that God just chose you to be in the way. And now it's up to you and your ultimate will, and not letting the temporal things stand in your way, and not letting the things that are seen stand in your way, but focusing on the things that are unseen, and the hope that we have. And obviously, for me, Christ is going to be able to bring us through that. I would also like to learn more about dealing with capture, interrogation, and mental fatigue and stress. Well, that kind of goes along with the same thing that I just talked about. You know, that mental fatigue, I mean, it really comes down to the battle of the wills and being able to do it until your last breath. I mean, that literally is what it comes down to. And you could put yourself through scenario after scenario of how far we'd be willing to go until there was nothing left. And like I said, when I thought about this scenario, I was going to fight to the death to not get in this situation to begin with. But I always bring up that counter scenario to this, where it's like, that's great to talk about avoidance, but what happens if somebody actually kidnapped my kids, took them to a secondary location, or my kids were somewhere where I was the only way they were going to find out where they were, and they captured me and said, okay, your kids are going to die, and I'm going to put your life at risk to be able to find them. And of course, these are two scenarios where I'm going to fight with everything that I have, with never wavering away from that. So it's important to think about those two and contrast it with each other, because this really opens up a door of, you know, what would I do? Also, the counter to this, how do I get better at interrogating? Well, it's to be interrogated. And this is played out multiple times overseas, where, you know, we had lives at risk right in front of us, where we would capture a guy and say, hey, is there anything else that's threatening around here? Is there anything else that would harm the other guys getting ready to go do this? And we would be able to cut that off at the pass and find really good information that saved lives. Hey, there's a weapons cache, or there's an explosive set ready to go that we ultimately were able to mitigate because we were able to get that information. And that's the key, is like, there is going to be times where it's necessary to find that out, or lives could be put at risk and ultimately lost if we don't do what's right. So that's just a quick kind of overview example, without getting into too much specifics, but how it applies overseas, how it applied in my life, and how I saw that work again and again. So this idea of interrogation, guys, I think it is one to really contemplate and consider. Obviously, these are very intense scenarios, but it could happen. And I think visually and even mentally, if I never even went in the military, I would have thought through a level of, what would I do in this scenario? What do I hold on to walk away from in these scenarios? The hope and the faith that I have will carry me through the toughest scenarios possible. again, I just can't help but to think of Christ on the cross, crucified. You know, that's why we contemplate that. That's why we pray on that, because it was so intense that that's the level of faith and that's the level of sacrifice we need to be ourselves willing to go through. Okay, next question.
How do you navigate being captured by an enemy force? Is it advised to try to escape or to simply wait for rescue? And what are some things that you can do to keep yourself calm while being pursued?
Okay, good question. And, you know, some of it might seem obvious, but not for everybody, right? And I often reflect on the fact that I'm blessed to have gone through what I did because I'm able to contemplate these things with a different perspective than everybody else. But how do you navigate being captured by an enemy force? Well, obviously, like I said, the avoidance right from the beginning is just to not get captured, right? To evade. That's the whole point. We talk about escape and evade. Get out of there. Break contact. Move away. I mean, this might be extreme, but you think about an enemy taking over a cruise ship, right? They're coming in, they're starting to murder everybody else on a Carnival cruise, whatever you want to, you know, visualize. Well, escaping and evading might just be getting off the ship. You know, just, you know, dumping yourself into the midnight ocean and saying, hey, I'm going to take my chances of escaping, evading to survive out in the water and have to deal with these guys. I'm not saying that that's the best answer. You know, of course, if you hear the gunshots coming down the hallway and they're going room to room, bang, 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 and you're the next one, and the only thing that's left, if you don't have any combative scenario, or, you know, again, I could say that now, you know, just fight for your life. You know, how many are there? Are there 10 guys coming through the hallway, and you don't have any skills at all, and you're just in the back of the room, and it's either them or the balcony, where you jump into the water, you know? Hey, it's a decision you have to make, but it's also just a level of escape and evasion that I think you need to contemplate why and when, just to get out of there, to break that contact. You know, the idea of waiting to be rescued is not something that I like or really play around with too much, because it's very similar to the whole idea of an active shooter where it's run, hide, and fight, where I am always going to teach fight first if you can, and then think about running or hiding. Because if I automatically tell myself, like, okay, I'm gonna wait to be rescued, well, you know, like my good old buddies at 30 Seconds Out always say, prepare to self-rescue. Nobody's coming for you. They're not gonna help you. That is more than likely gonna be the case. Do they even know that you're gonna be there? I mean, this is a very hopeful way of thinking in the sense of the physical world, that somebody's gonna come to your aid. And that's just not the case. I don't wanna plan for that or rely on that. Okay, so I was on the highway the other day, and this is a real world scenario, and it's unbelievable that this occurs this way. Well, let me take that back. It's not unbelievable. I know this to be true, but I think for a lot of people it is unbelievable. But let me explain what happened. So it was really early in the morning. We were prepping to go fishing with one of my buddies. We were on the highway, and this guy, clearly intoxicated, was walking right on the highway, but this is where construction was going on, and there is no shoulder. There was about 1.5 feet where the yellow line was, and then the concrete walls, and I had a truck towing a boat next to me, and I was in a truck, and I had to tuck up almost as close to that boat as I can to get around him as we came around this bend. And I'm sitting here telling my son, I'm like, there's a dead man walking right there. There's no question in my mind that somebody is not going to be paying attention this early in the morning. That guy is going to get clipped and killed. So the only thing that I could do in that moment was to dial 911 and at least alert somebody to get them out there to pull this guy off the highway, to create a roadblock, get some lights on, and to be able to help him out. I'm over here doing 65 miles an hour. There was no way I was stopping in that traffic with one way. Called 911, and I literally sat on the phone for 7.5 minutes on hold. This is 2 o'clock in the morning. I mean, this is mind-blowing. And this is what I expect, though, and this is what I told my son, and I'll get to the comment that he made at the very end, but I'm like, okay, 6.5 minutes, somewhere around that point where they finally answered. And I said, ma'am, I was like, I have a guy that's walking, you know, westbound on this highway, and his life's in danger. He's intoxicated, he needs help immediately. And her first question was, is he injured or dying? And I said, no, but I believe he's going to be. And immediately she said, thank you very much. I'm going to connect you to the state police, and literally cut me off and I waited on state police to answer the phone for 10 minutes and they never answered. And that is a real story that happened, I don't know, 5 days ago, 6 days ago. So the fact that we think somebody's gonna come to our aid is just not realistic. We don't test those waters often enough, and we need to build the confidence that nobody is coming to your rescue. So the idea of you saying, should you wait to be rescued? Absolutely not. You need to rely on you, and you need to self-rescue. You need to take care of yourself and do everything you can to break contact, to get out of that, and do everything you can for yourself. It's the whole thing about being kidnapped too. If you get taken to a secondary location, your chances of survival just went way down. They certainly reduced. So it's to never get in that situation to begin with. The only way that would ever happen, again, what's the scenario that it could happen? Well, I just saw the same people take my kids to another location that I know they're gonna take me to. I'm like, okay, yep, you can cuff me. I'm gonna go there because now their lives are at risk and I might be able to get a little bit closer to helping them. Just one thing to kind of put that together for you. What are the things that you can do to be calm when being pursued? Again, who's pursuing you? Where are they pursuing you? I think my biggest feedback to that question is don't stop. Keep busy, constantly progress, and don't lose hope. That's the major thing, is you need to focus on motivating yourself to stay busy and keep taking one step at a time. And honestly, even if you're finding yourself almost at a static position, say you're looking to shift gears, or you're stuck behind a Connex box and you're waiting to figure out what to do next and how to evade this crew. Say they came after you, you were able to get out of the truck that they're in, now they're looking for you. You know, maybe they even have dogs, or whatever the case is, but keep your mind active. Okay, I'm gonna go over next, I'm gonna sprint to that box, then I'm gonna jump in the water, then I'm gonna swim over there. You can't stop thinking, because that's when you'll find yourself, you know, in the static zone, which we don't wanna find ourselves in. So the biggest thing to not lose hope, and the biggest thing to stay positive, is to keep your brain active on what you're doing next, and don't stop. The second you feel like you're slowing down or staring at the ground, you need to be thinking about where your next move is gonna be. And again, that's a combative principle. Always know your next move. And if you don't, you need to figure it out immediately. You know, the idea of thinking about this stuff and repping it out in your mind, that's the key, is getting repetition in. You know, I always talk about repetition in training. So you guys are worried about this stuff. Clearly, you're bringing it up, and I appreciate these questions. But if it's something that you're concerned about, you've got to do something to mitigate it. You got to take action now, you know? The guy that just asked that question, after you watch this, what are you going to do to change this? Are you going to go find some training? Are you going to get some mental reps in? Are you going to get your buddies together and go through some scenarios? It's a real question, and you guys should be. If it's a fear you have, you got to do something to counteract that fear. This episode is brought to you by Aimpoint, a name that I'm very familiar with, especially coming up in the teams, running a lot of their gear on our guns that are smaller packages and set up differently. You guys have been asking me a lot about red dots, and these guys are staying on the cutting edge of technology and making sure that guys out there in the field get some of the best stuff out there. Go check them out. The link is down below. They have a special promo for dangerous questions, and like I said, they're setting a standard. Go check them out.
Officials are warning of a widespread cybersecurity attack.
Frustrations and delays have continued as countless are still without power.
Market volatility is at its highest since the pandemic.
There are a number of reports across the state.
Unidentified cracking news. There is no doubt our grid is at risk.
The target is entering airspace.
Next question. What was your SERE school experience like? What was the most difficult part? Okay. So I had the opportunity to go through quite a few SERE schools, which they were a blessing, because you got to see a different perspective on a lot of different things that you're going to go through: questioning, interrogation, being stuck in a prison cell. I mean, all these ideas that you're thinking about, like, oh, what if this happens? What am I going to do? But because I had different perspectives, you know, I felt like it was definitely a blessing. And for me, you ask what was the most difficult part, but I found it very fun to go through this stuff, because first of all, you know you're not going to die, right? And now you get to explore a different part of the psychological aspect of who you are. So it's kind of an excitement of being like, okay, this is going to be fun. I'm going to dig into things that I've never really exposed myself to. Being hungry out in the woods, or being stuck in a cell, or being tortured or whatever the case is, whatever I'm being exposed to, there was a level of excitement that I knew I was going to get better from. So for me, it was digging into the psychology, into my heart and my mind in areas that I was never able to grow from before. I think that was the part that I loved the most. That was the part that I think anybody should be seeking if you're going to grow in these skills. And again, the most difficult part was the unknown. It's always the unknown. Even with buds or any type of interrogation experience, it's that you're thinking about what's going to happen that I don't know about. I think if you're going into scenario training or you're going into this type of training, don't ever game it. And one scenario I always bring up was the first time I ever did a shooting competition outside of the military. I was watching everybody go up to the line and look at the course. And I'm like, what is everybody doing? This is so foreign to me. The last thing I wanted to do was see what the course was like, because it was the shock and awe factor, and the value in training was seeing it for the first time and adapting to that and getting the best shot that I could, right? And some courses are set up like that, but not these courses. So I never wanted to game anything. And when you guys go train, the more you don't game it, the more you're exposed to a true unknown. And that's the level of adaptability you'll be able to apply to everything else in your life. And that's why I think the psychological aspect to this is so important, because we get to level up in all these other areas in our life. What would I do in this situation? Well, now I got exposed to something that's going to make me a little bit better. I think my biggest challenge was being submissive and knowing that I had to kind of go with the flow, that the guy torturing me, I couldn't just lob his head off, poke his eyes out, bite his ear off, and stomp on his face. I think that was probably the most difficult part of SERE training for me, was just being like, okay, I'm gonna let you cuff me and put a smile on my face because I have to go through this training. Because every part of me knows that if that comes into my life, the trigger of exploding and just not letting you ever do that to me was what I was gonna do. I was gonna take action. And if there was a gun around, I'm like, oh, cool, that's my gun, that's my blade, that's my stuff, that's my gear. And as soon as I say go, I'm gonna take it all from you, and I'm gonna shove all of you in the ground and take everybody else out that's right here in front of me, and then control the environment. Again, some environments are gonna be more difficult to do that than others, but being submissive was very, very difficult for me, because that's just not the nature that I know is gonna win fights. That's not the nature that I know is going to conquer these small scenarios. So for me, that was the most difficult part. But it also knowing, I think along with that submissiveness, it did teach me a level of submissive attitude that I needed in certain scenarios. And that's kind of a lot to do with even weapon takeaways. I see a lot of people be overly aggressive in my courses, where they learn, actually, I have to teach them, which caveat, by the way, I'd rather have somebody be too aggressive than not enough. But some of the guys that were overly aggressive, or even women, that I had to work that out of them. I actually had to say, hey, it's important in this scenario, when you have a gun to your face at 10 feet away, that you're not trying to be some macho tough guy, because that's only gonna ramp them up, and you don't want that. You wanna be able to bring them down to your level, or to a level that's calmer and allows you to be that fly trap. You know what I mean? Hey, I don't want any problems, and boom, then you explode. So that taught me a lot of that as well. It's like I had to be submissive in some environments that actually worked to my advantage. Not in the beginning, not where I could have exploded and escaped and evaded and broke contact, but more in the sense of, okay, this just isn't the right time for me to be aggressive. I got to go with the flow and say, okay, hey, what do you want from me right now? And maybe some of the interrogations that you go through are that simple. I think the concept of interrogation in today's modern age can be very difficult. Some people are looking to exploit you for information. I mean, let's apply it to simple social media scenarios. I mean, people are getting messages all the time. Hey, I want to be your friend. I need help overseas. Some people have impersonated me, and they've tried to exploit money out of people, saying that I was down and out and I needed money. Well, that's a level of interrogation. You're being interrogated into something that's not real. Well, we need to be aware of that, and we need to protect ourselves that, especially from a cyber perspective, especially from a communications perspective, is that most of what you see today is not real. Most of what you hear is not real. Everything on the internet, you can almost bet that it's not real until you test it and know for sure it's true. There's even a couple of videos I think we're gonna play that I'm like, is that real? Is that, like, it's in question. I'm like, I just don't know. And so I automatically put into a category where until it's proven physically by somebody that's actually a pro that was on target, I can't really take it for truth. So something to consider. Hopefully you guys got something out of that and talking about SERE interrogation in these specific scenarios. They are different, and I'm glad people are asking these questions. And hopefully you found something in there to apply to your life. Is everybody gonna go get captured tomorrow and get stuck in this high level of interrogation? Probably not, but there are learning points all throughout this again and again. All right, let's get to the scenario breakdowns. And we got scenario number 1. All right. So we've got a guy already right there. I mean, already looking around, touching his waistband. That's a telltale sign. Again, these are these pre-fight indicators. He's obviously demanding cash from this woman at the cash register. For the most part, again, that learning on how to be somewhat submissive in this scenario is it really gonna help me? Her instincts are probably like, he's got the gun in my face right now. That's probably not gonna help me to be violent in this scenario. But something's gonna happen here in a second, and I'll show you where I don't agree with this scenario or this principle. Okay, pause. Right there, she tried to reach over the counter and do a weapon takeaway. We've already seen videos where that worked out for them, but it is just a principle that I am not gonna do unless I'm breaking the rule and I know why. Because this is a simple one where she wasn't successful on grabbing it, and ultimately that gun could have went off. There's too much of an obstacle that you have to get over in order to gain control of that. And again, guys, is this money that she's pulling out of the drawer at this moment really worth her life? If that gun's real, his finger's on the trigger, any of this back and forth could have been a risk to her ultimately losing her life. And that's not something that I think a drawer full of cash is worth. I just don't. So different scenarios for different people, different contexts. Again, maybe that was her last meal that she's counting on. And that very well could have been the case. And I can't tell you what to do, but I'm gonna continue to back up these principles with saying a drawer full of cash is not worth your life, and you could probably figure it out somewhere else. And leaping over a counter to do a weapon takeaway is not a smart idea. I don't think that this guy would have got this cash and just been happy to walk away at this point. So the fact that she continues to chase him down is just not a smart idea. She's not armed. She's not prepared for this. She just turned the fight to her advantage a little bit, and that gave her a little bit of confidence that nothing happened to her, so she continued to pursue him. But that's not something in this scenario that I would recommend to you guys. If you can break contact, give him the cash, he walks away, that's a win, game over. Okay, let's figure out how to recoup that money somewhere else and not get into a life-threatening scenario. So hopefully you guys took something away from that. Let's get to the next video. All right, motorcycle robbery is very, very, very common, especially in South America. They're becoming more and more common. So he pulls the gun out, and they already got the gun away. Okay, now, of course, the motorcycle fell down, and it kind of looks to me like it pinned him there, which he kind of knows that, and that sucks, getting hit with your own helmet. This guy's just getting hammered right now, and honestly, rightfully so. They're pissed off that they even came to, attack them, but at some point, do we have that threat mitigated? Is he still a threat anymore with his leg pinned? Both of you could be on top of them, just subduing him at that point. The weapon's been taken away, but he still could be a threat. He could have another gun. He could have another blade. It's not something you want to discount. And you do want to neutralize this guy to a point where you don't feel like he's a threat anymore. But I think overall they did a good job. The one thing that the guy in the blue did that I did not like was he kept his hands behind his back the entire time. As soon as somebody starts to approach, guys, your hands need to be out. Great on him for taking the gun away, but it could have been even faster. Okay, while he's approaching, you see he has to take steps forward and then bring his hands out. Okay, and you know what? Maybe in that context that would have worked to his advantage because he still looks submissive as he creeps up and then decides to get the angle and then get the gun out of his way. Ultimately, I mean, you can look at this a lot of different ways, but it worked out to their advantage. He picks the gun up, and now this guy's just getting tagged with his own helmet. Awareness, he's stuck on a motorcycle, and he's pulling up to you with a firearm out. So what's going on in the environment here that they couldn't evade away from him in another way? He was slow to get this thing out. He's trying to reach for something. They clearly see that, And whether he got hung up and they caught that's a level of awareness where really good on them. You know, he's starting to pull it out. He's saying something. He's making a threat. They closed the distance. And I think that was a better option for them, knowing that thing could have came out and been a threat to both of them. But they mitigated that at this point, and I think it was handled well for what they had. I mean, these are two people that don't look like they have much training. They're just making it work, and sometimes that's what it takes. All right, guys. We talked about escape and evading. We talked about these two scenarios, breaking these things down. You know, there's a lot to learn there. As always, take notes. Make sure you're applying these things to your life every single time. Thanks for watching Dangerous Questions, an Ironclad original. And as always, God bless you guys. See you on the next one. Peace.